Welcome to Rise, Hope and Healing After Sexual Betrayal. Healing from sexual betrayal is not something you are meant to do alone. I am your hostess, MaryAnn Michaelis, and each week we feature conversations with experts in betrayal trauma recovery. If this podcast is helpful to you, we ask that you please share it so that someone else may not feel so alone. You can also find our companion course at humanintimacy.com. We're so glad that you're with us. Welcome back to Rise. I'm so excited to continue the conversation that we've been having with Darrell Brazell. Darrell has done 2 years of intensive work being trained by Dr. Minwalla, and he also has 25 years of experience of working with individuals struggling with unwanted sexual behaviors and couples as well. And so we are picking up our conversation once again, talking about some of the rooms in Dr. Minwalla's 22 rooms of betrayal. And last week we were talking about some intimate abuse behaviors. Darrell, welcome. And where do you want to start today?
MaryAnn, before we jump into a couple more rooms and more of the integrity abuse behaviors, I think it might be helpful to give your listeners a picture of how I try to do this in my intensives.
Sure.
As we start to dig into this difficult content, I keep a close eye on my guys. And when I see them starting to get close to being overwhelmed, we take a break. We do some grounding exercises. We do some appreciation. I help them connect back to God in a way that helps them regain their footing, get stronger, and then we go back into the hard content. And in a podcast format where you and I are talking, I'm afraid that it's really easy for me to lose sight of a wife who's hearing this content and it's striking deep places for her. And so, to any wife that's in that place, let me really encourage you, hit the pause button whenever you need to. Take a break, go for a walk, do grounding exercises, do what is healthy for you. Don't just plod through this, because that can leave you overwhelmed. And that's the last thing we would want for any of you. If you are feeling overwhelmed, and if that means listening to this in small doses and then circling back to it, that's great, because these are really difficult concepts. Whether you are the betrayer or whether you are the one who's been betrayed.
I'm so glad that you mentioned that, Darrell, because we were talking about really deep pain. And just as you said, if there's something difficult, hit pause, take a couple of deep breaths and ground yourself. And I hope you'll come back, because I think this information that we're going to talk about today is really important. So, Darrell, where do you want to start today?
Well, I was thinking that it'd probably be helpful for me to backtrack just a little bit and frame these integrity abuse behaviors. In our last conversation, we were talking about the integrity abuse behaviors that happen during the covert phase, during the phase where the husband has dug the basement, he's hiding out in the basement, the wife doesn't know what's going on. So the list we went through last time, those were specific behaviors that happened during that covert phase. Now, some people look at some of those behaviors and say, well, why are they called integrity abuse behaviors? I think that a good way of looking at it is that some of the behaviors listed are just deceptive in and of themselves. So that's an integrity abuse. But some of the behaviors, especially as we'll get into the next two lists, the next two phases, are behaviors that are, yes, sometimes deceptive in and of themselves, but sometimes they are like the foundation, the support that keeps a deceptive system in place. And especially in this context, a deceptive system that has enabled or established or maintained a position of overt control.
And that also leads into what we talked about in the very first podcast in this series of that intentionally manipulated reality. This false reality supported by intentional abuse behaviors.
Not intentional, Many of these are done even unknowingly because they've just been part of, how do I put it, taught and modeled behaviors. In fact, that's one of the reasons why I believe creating and focusing on the list of what are my worst, my most frequent, my most harmful integrity abuse behaviors is so beneficial, because many times guys are doing these without even realizing they're doing it because done it all their life. They
Right.
watch father do it, they watch other men in power do it, and so it is normal to them, and so it's unobserved, it's almost unconscious. By focusing on these behaviors, it brings awareness that then provides the opportunity, "Okay, I'm now aware of this reality. Now I'm in a better place to interrupt it and do it differently."
And that makes so much sense. I have so many betrayed partners that say, "But why? How could they do this?" And they cannot grasp and understand how could they do this. And my response is usually they have been behind this facade, sometimes intentionally, sometimes not intentionally. And a lot of it, as you're saying, may not even be conscious because it's so ingrained, because it's been years, it's been honed and finely tuned. And so that is why it has nothing to do with you. It's all about self protection and hiding and shame.
Yeah, my standard line for wives is, "It's not about you, but
Mhm.
it greatly affects you."
Right.
And that's the difficult reality.
So, is there more on the integrity abuse behaviors, or are you jumping into some other rooms? Where are we going to go?
No, well, I'm jumping into another room. So, room two is the integrity abuse behaviors that happen in the covert phase.
Okay.
Where I'd like to go next is what I call room four. I'll just briefly put this up here because I think this image is really impactful image. And room four is in the exposure phase. And one of Omar's analogies here that's really impactful is, imagine the car crash, because the car crash is D-Day. The car crash is when the reality of his secret sexual basement collides with her reality of, but I thought my world was different. And what's really horrible in this phase is that in the midst of this car crash, instead of the husband getting out and checking on his wife and how badly she's injured, he moves into a damage control that is covering his tracks.
So that image, you can find this on YouTube, but that image, I want to talk about what's happening in that image. You got two cars. They've had a head on collision. The fenders and front parts are crumpled. There's a female lying on the ground with glass shattered around her. And there's a male kind of leaning on the other end of the car, kind of looking up into the air. And it looks like he's smoking a cigar. Correct?
Cigarette.
Okay, so he's turned away, he's not looking towards it, and she's just lying on the ground. So I wanna make sure that we're painting that picture.
I forgot for the moment that not everybody's seeing this. But
Alright.
yes, great job illustrating that picture. And the point of that picture, too, is he's smoking a cigarette as a way of dealing with his own anxiety and not looking at the real harm.
Okay.
And unfortunately, that is the typical way that it plays. A wife finds a receipt, she finds internet history, she finds a chat in his phone. Whatever she finds, she goes into investigative mode, very understandably, naturally, because what in the world has happened? My
Mhm.
world is crumbling, and I don't even know how badly it's crumbling.
Or where the edges are.
Where the edges are, where does it fall off? If I take one more step, am I going to fall off a cliff to who knows where? And in the midst of that, he responds most of the time with an even stronger round of integrity abuse behaviors, because he's in that mode of self protection, that mode of, oh no, how much does she know? Okay, I know she knows this much, but I've got to protect the rest of it, because if she knows all of it, maybe there's a chance we can survive. But if she knows even 50%, well, then I'm toast and I'm going to lose her and I'm going to lose my family. I might lose my job. And so he goes into a survival mode many times of denials, outright lies, trying to hide evidence, cover tracks, erase histories, etc.
And oftentimes she might not realize that she's lying on the ground,
Mhm.
totally injured. And oftentimes there's that attention on him. And there's a belief, and this was my belief. Uh, he has a problem. He needs to go get it fixed. And as soon as he gets it fixed, things will be okay. All
Right.
of the attention and focus goes towards him getting fixed. Meanwhile, I've got this secret, I've got this wounding, and most of the time, not a lot of resources. And so now I'm living in this new fragmented reality, perhaps the one that I'm creating because I don't feel like I can tell anybody. I've got such deep, intense shame. And so here I am alone and wounded. And sometimes they'll also be, but honey, this is going to be really hard. I need you to come with me. I need you to help me. I need your support. Can't you support me while I'm changing? This is so hard. In reality, she needs the next 6 months convalescing and in surgery and intensive care.
Exactly. That's part of where the car crash can be helpful. And the reality is that both their worlds blew up at that moment.
I also find that there's also some relief. He's been
Mhm.
carrying this huge burden 15, 20, 40 years. So, whoo, whoo, I'm glad that's out in the open. Okay, yeah, now I probably need to go get some help, but it's a burden that I don't have the secret anymore.
Right.
But it's brand new to her. And she's starting at square one, and he might be 15, 20 years ahead because he's been carrying this burden ready to be done with it versus I don't even know how to make sense of what this burden even is.
Sure.
But keep on going there, Daryl.
All right. So, room 4 is what Dr. Minwalla calls integrity abuse shaping in the exposure phase. The covert phase is when the basement was being built, when the wife didn't know anything about the basement. Now we're in the exposure phase. She stuck her head down the trap door. She's seen the room. She's in shock. She's in trauma because she's seen the room and he's now in damage control. And so, this next list that I'm about to put up on the screen, and we'll read, especially for those listening, is the list of integrity abuse behaviors. Now, for those of you who remember the list from last week or you've gone and looked at them online, there's repetition. So there's some of the behaviors that were in the covert phase that guess what? They're
There's
still happening in the exposure phase. And then there's some new ones that kick in. So I'll go ahead and share my screen and share that list. And we'll just go through those slowly. So lying by omission, those are still there. They're huge. Deception, hiding, manipulating the truth. The gaslighting, still there. Oftentimes ramps up in exposure phase. Externalizing responsibility, putting the blame on other places, oftentimes, unfortunately, even the wife, which is the next one, blaming the intimate partner or relationship for the DCSR. That's an acronym that basically means the secret sexual basement. Denying the problem or the disorder and its actual consequences. Denying, well, it's just a little struggle and it shouldn't impact you that much, especially when it's talking about denying the disorder. The focus there is denying the deceptive aspect of it because the deception is really where the bigger disorder is.
Mhm.
Okay. Continued sexual relational violation behavior, exposure happens. And yet sometimes guys continue the affair, or they continue to look at porn, or they continue to violate the understood or even spelled out agreements in the relationship. There's sometimes a little bit of minimization, just a little bit. I was saying that as a minimizing my minimization. There's rationalization, there's justifying, there's projecting, there's denying, there's covering up. Covering up is a huge one in the exposure phase.
And I don't see this, maybe this is somewhere else on the list. I often see, "Hey, that was our sons. blaming it on the kids, blaming it on
That's
somebody else.
that is an atrocious part of covering up, that I'll throw my son or someone else under the bus rather than owning my own issues.
Yeah.
Okay. There are partial disclosures. So a husband knows the wife knows about something. He knows that she knows about 10% of what's going on. So he gives a partial disclosure of about 15% in the hopes that that will appease and calm down the situation. There are staggered disclosures. I call that death by a thousand cuts. A little bit today, a little bit next week, a little bit next month, et cetera, et cetera.
And oftentimes I see those happen when the betrayed partner finds more information. Oh, well, now you found it. Okay, I guess I have to tell you about it. Nope, I swear that's everything. There's nothing else. And then
Right.
3 days later, oh, darn, you found that one. Okay, yep.
Mm.
And just wanting to also touch on the complexity every time that happens with
Mhm.
complex trauma, the whole dump truck full of manure shows up and dumps everything from the past there. And so you can say, I don't know why you're freaking out. This isn't that big of a deal. It was just whatever it was. But it's not. It's whatever it was plus all of the other times that I was betrayed by you that are
Right.
showing up in this one moment. And so this is why staggered disclosures are so incredibly damaging to partners.
Continuing to list, revising facts in history, obstructing, stonewalling, refusing to cooperate or speak, technical manipulation.
We're talking about hiding the history on devices? What does that mean?
Well, it can be many things. It's finding ways to technically say how this didn't happen or that didn't happen, or just rearranging the circumstances on technicalities.
Ah, okay.
Okay. Verbal abuse or diminishment. There they are in the car crash. The wife is bleeding out, but then she's raising questions or she's investigating something, and he gets big to shut everything down. Okay. Which is the next part of that, intimidation and threatening, being aggressive or passively aggressive. And equivocating is a form of deception that uses ambiguity, withdrawing, abandonment, feigning innocence or ignorance, assuming the role of victim. I've just run over you with my car, but I am so hurt right now because my head bumped up against the side window and I just can't think straight. Okay. Fault finding, demanding immediate equality. Okay, yes, I've run over you, but you're raising your voice at me, and that's just not right. And we need to be treated as equals. Frequent or rapid integrity violations or abusive actions. Sometimes it comes out almost like a machine gun. Okay. Shaping the narrative, defying logic or reason as a protective tactic, shifting the focus to the abuser's pain, selective attention or memory, callous or cruel attitudes and actions toward the wife, lack of demonstrated remorse, lack of demonstrated empathy, integrity abuse towards the victim. For example, denying the facts in the context of couples treatment. You can see all of these behaviors are very damaging to a wife, but also to the relationship. And unfortunately, they are the norm in that phase of exposure because when it all hits the fan, then there's that terrified place for the husband of, oh no, what's this going to mean? What's this going to be? And so when he's living in that fearful place, he goes into total self protection. And unfortunately, the self protection at that moment has tremendous cost and price for the wife. And that is so incredibly unfair because she's the one who has been harmed so greatly and just now discovered that.
Right.
So he's known about it their whole relationship. But now that she knows about it and she's in such trauma, he's adding to her trauma with these harmful integrity abuse behaviors.
Yeah.
And so many times in this place, it's very understandable why wives think, I must be married to an absolute narcissist. I'm married to a psychopath, because nobody who had any humanity at all in them would kick somebody when they're down like this.
Right.
And that is 100% understandable. That is her reality in that moment.
And her reality is that it's not understandable. And that's why the shock and the confusion and my mind cannot wrap itself around it, especially if he's a good guy, especially if I've had him on a pedestal, especially if he's a church or community leader.
Mhm.
How do I make sense of that? The brain just can't fathom how to get there.
And then on the other side, if there have been many struggles, which is often the case, then a wife's brain is like, okay, now I'm starting to connect a few dots. And the times that she's set things aside and allowed things that were harmful or difficult or wrong on his part. And she was like, okay, I'm going to be gracious to him. I'm going to give him grace. I'm going to love him because he's human. And in essence, she didn't realize many of these integrity abuse behaviors were connected to the secret basement, and didn't realize the deep harm that he was causing her. She's been able to put those aside and keep moving forward because she didn't know the totality of it and she didn't see the connections. And
Right.
then all of a sudden she sees the connections, and now it is incredibly overwhelming.
And Daryl, I want to point out one other aspect of this. As you know, I have this grief after betrayal impact scale. I'll have a link for it if anybody would like to take it. I haven't been able to find much research in this area. And as I've been reading the results, there's one question that I haven't figured out. When I looked at it the first time, I went, what? And I've got a set of questions asking, what was it like for you before and what was it like after? And so this question asks about how much did I blame myself for my partner's behaviors in our relationship before betrayal and after
Right.
betrayal? And the initial number that I've been looking at is about 45%. 45% of people are saying, yeah, I blamed myself for behaviors before the betrayal. And here's the part that's fascinating, and the after discovery of response actually is at 42. It
Yeah.
actually went down. Oftentimes, we talk about that internalized blame. There's something wrong with me. This is why. But according to this data, it's showing that there's maybe even some relief like, oh, this wasn't about me. Here's some relief also because maybe this is where things start to make more sense. And I have been blaming myself because of all of the covert behaviors that didn't make sense.
Yeah, that would make sense. Anecdotally, through 25 years of working in this arena, some wives post discovery internalize the shame, they internalize the blame. And, why didn't I see the signs? I should have known better. And they go down that road.
Mhm.
And then some wives are able to look at it and go, okay, now this makes more sense. Now I understand why X,
Right.
Y, and because now I have the data that makes understanding possible.
Right. It's like the piece of the puzzle that was missing all
Right.
along.
Which is one of the reasons why I believe that disclosure is such an important part of the healing process, because it helps a wife who's been under this system of deception and control because he had the information and she didn't. It helps her begin to finally put the pieces together and make sense of why things have been the way they are.
It's like shattering through this wall of false reality. And now I can start to make sense of my real reality.
Once discovery happens, hopefully He's moving into healthy sobriety and recovery. He's doing his groups, he's getting counseling, she's getting trauma support, she's getting healing. And so the next phase that we move into, Dr. Minwalla calls it the symptom progression phase. And one of the things I like about that description is it helps us remember that just because we made it past disclosure doesn't mean that everything is healed and things are going great.
And let me clarify, as a CSAT, I use the word disclosure for formal therapeutic disclosure, which is very, very different than a here, let me dump everything on you. How are you using that term?
I was using it more in the terms of a facilitated disclosure done really well.
Okay. And so that's usually that three parts. Here's what I've done. Here's my behaviors. The betrayed partner responds with, here's the impact it's had on me, which is her kind of reconsolidation of herself and her making sense of her story. And then that's followed up with the emotional restitution letter and the living amends. Okay.
Correct.
All right.
Right.
Thank you.
Okay. So some people think, okay, we've made it through that really difficult phase, and that is a really powerful healing phase, but it's a phase, it's not the finish line.
All right.
Because unfortunately, many of the struggles then continue. Okay. Even when the husband is sober, he struggles most of the time with many of these integrity abuse behaviors.
Because they've been patterns that he's been carrying for years and years. He's been really fine tuning and honing. He's really good at them.
Often really good at them, often they go back for generations.
Right.
At every phase of this process, wives are in a dangerous place. There's a powerful scene from the movie Shawshank Redemption. For this, the character Andy Dufresne was falsely convicted of killing his wife, and he was working in the warden's office, and he closed the door, locked everybody out, and connected the PA system. And for a minute or two, he was playing Mozart over the loudspeakers. And that crime got him solitary confinement. And he's at the lunch table after that talking about it. And he was saying, now it's in my head. I can hold on to that. And that's where I have a place of hope. And Red, the Morgan Freeman character, the hardened lifer, stops him in his tracks and he says the line, hope is a dangerous thing. And in my intensive, I play that clip trying to help the guys understand this is where your wife is. She wants to hope, but she's hoped in the past and then had the rug pulled out from under her so many times that now she is terrified to hope.
And it gets more and more painful each time.
Exactly. And so, again, this is why focusing on these integrity abuse behaviors and learning how to reduce and eliminate them is such a critical part of the healing process. Because every time he reverts to an integrity abuse behavior, it pulls a rug out from under her from that place of hope.
And that very tenuously found safety.
Absolutely.
And it's so tentative. Can I trust? Can I hope? I'm going to barely open the door and maybe dip my pinky toe in the water. And
Yeah.
boy, is that a vulnerable space.
Absolutely. And so room 15 of Minwalla's 22 rooms is integrity abuse shaping in the symptom progression phase. So we've gone from the covert when it was hidden to the exposure phase when it hit the fan and came to light. And now we're post exposure. And yet, unfortunately, most of the time, these integrity abuse behaviors are continuing. So here is the list of behaviors that still often cause great harm, even post discovery. So again, we've got lying, lying by omission, We got deception, hiding, manipulating the truth. We have gaslighting, externalizing responsibility. For those of you who are saying, well, that's the same list. Yeah, unfortunately, it is. There's a few little differences, but now what's happening is she's in the hospital bed now. She's gotten some treatment, but now we're coming in and poking with more of these behaviors. I'm not going to read all of them because there is a lot of
Mhm.
overlap. I think this one's a new one here, violating agreements or commitments.
There's been a violation of agreement and commitment all the way through with the betrayal, right? So
Absolutely.
so these are new commitments that have been made. They're not hidden, unaddressed, unnamed.
Exactly. So, for example, he says, as part of my recovery, I'm going to attend group 3 times a week. And 2, 3, maybe 6 months go by. He's doing really well in his recovery. And he decides, I think once a week is enough for me, which might be true, except for the fact that he's made the agreement. He's told her, this is my plan. But instead of going to her and saying, okay, I'm doing really well, and we've got all this going on with our kids' activities, I think I'm ready to move down to once a week. He just makes the decision, changes the agreement, and quits doing what he said he would do. Inability or unwillingness to be accountable, refusing to participate in repair or healing, inability to provide valuable care and support, pathologizing the wife's reactions. What's wrong with you? I've been sober for a year now. You shouldn't be reacting this way. Trauma has no timeline. And so triggers can happen months, years, decades down the road in recovery. And is the one who caused the harm. It's his responsibility to respond well when those happen, because a wife doesn't choose to be triggered. The
Right.
trigger blew up on her. Either she or oftentimes the husband stepped on a landmine right in front of her. And we didn't know that landmine was there. If we knew it was there, we wouldn't have stepped on it. But trying to blame her for the landmine going off is another act of harm. Eh,
Yeah. I'm looking at this chart, Daryl, and I know we'll have the link in the show notes, but I want to make sure we don't skip over this very next one because I think this one's such a important one to talk about.
Yeah, you read it.
Demanding that the victim get over it and move on. Boy,
Yeah,
how many times have I heard that? Why can't she heal? Why won't she just hurry up? I'm doing everything. What's wrong with her? She must be crazy. And this impatience that I see so often in my office. I want to make sure that we're really addressing this one.
absolutely. Unfortunately, sometimes in some of the group work or the connections with therapists or pastors or others who don't understand trauma and the depth of the trauma, there's the place of, well, she should stay in her lane. And the reality is, people heal in whatever time they need to heal. And you can't put okay, well, we're 6 months or a year or 10 years past this. So we can't talk about that anymore.
Right. And there's so many others on here. We could probably do 10 more podcasts on. We will have the link on our show notes. Daryl, I am so grateful in behalf of our listeners and our viewers, and also for your wealth of information, for your willingness to share everything that you've learned through your work, through the service for so many years. Is there anything that you want to share as we wrap up for today?
Well, hopefully, if you've listened to this, you've hit pause, you've taken breaks, you've taken good care of yourself, because this is hard stuff. Obviously, we've just scratched the surface of Minwalla's 22-room metaphor, let alone when I've added a 23rd room of the spiritual implications. If you want your husband to learn more about this, send him to my intensive. Ask him to go, because that's where we'll take a deep dive into it. You can go to Dr. Minwalla's website. He has a number of PDFs. some podcasts, some different things that will help you understand this information and some of that we didn't get into at more depth.
Thank you so much, Daryl. I know, as we said before, there's so much depth here. I know that we'll have you back on the podcast in the future. And so I look forward to future conversations. Thank you so much for your time today. And to our listeners and viewers, we know we've been talking about difficult topics today, and always encourage you to take care of yourselves, reach out for support, and make sure that you're doing your daily self care. Take a walk, get a drink of water, reach out to somebody for any support that you need after this. If you have questions, if you have suggestions, we'd love to hear them. You can send an email to info@humanintimacy.com. If this has been helpful for you, please share it with someone who might benefit from it. And we'd love for you to hit a like on our YouTube page at Human Intimacy or whatever app you're accessing this on. So thanks again, and we'll see you next week.